Today on the MotoMan podcast, we're sitting down with a man who turns passion into a price tag.
Finance companies and unfortunately governments rely on us for values.
Some even say today's guest has the biggest single impact on what your collector vehicle is worth.
Hagerty has the largest database of collector cars, bar none.
Then he drops one line that turns buyer's remorse into timing.
You're not paying too much, you're just buying too early.
Then he shares the rule that separates nice from next level.
You can't pay enough for a top quality car.
So belt in, you're about to learn what the market says out loud and what it only whispers. This is Dave Kinney. So this is what? Before you and I get too far down the road into today's episode, I want to share a little bit behind the scenes about what you're going to see. You've now experienced 10 of our reimagined MotoMan podcast episodes, which have all been shot with our new state-of-the-art Sony Cinema Line gear. However, before we acquired that gear, we did shoot 10 episodes of the podcast with the old gear. We're calling those the Vault episodes. What does that mean for you today? The picture quality, it may not be to the level to which you've become accustomed. However, the audio, the post-production, and absolutely the storytelling is all the same. So while you watch this discussion between me and an amazing guest, I will continue on the top end of this, a bicycle with a Volkswagen motor strapped to it. 13 years. This discussion is 15 years in the making because this would not have happened without you and an unsolicited conversation at the first ever Shake Shack in New York City in 2006. What did you say there?
I reminded you that we all grow old and you're going to wake up one day and you're going to be 50 years old or 40 years old and you haven't answered the real question about what you wanted to do.
And I didn't ask you, like, this wasn't a conversation that like, hey, what's the meaning of life? We were just like, hey, what's going on in the classic car world? And you just completely cut through it and asked a question that was in my brain at that point. And then you put me into a tailspin. I went into a month-long panic attack. And you are the reason why I gave up the most ridiculous rent control deal in Gramercy Park in New York City, thanks to you. But we wouldn't be sitting here with a Gullwing, a Ford GT, and a couple of airplanes. So that is also thanks to you.
Well, I mean, I think that, a lot of times a throwaway line to somebody is a real important line to the next person. And I think that, if you think about it, there's a whole lot of times when somebody says something that really resonates. And when you say it or I say it, it's just part of the conversation. And to somebody, waiting to hear that maybe from somebody else or to distill a problem down to just a few words, I think that that's what we were talking about there. I've had times like that too. Somebody said something to me and I'm like, oh my goodness, you're absolutely right. I hadn't thought of it that way.
But did you see something in me at that point?
Yeah, I did.
And what was it?
Well, I know that you were involved in the, you were making games.
Yes, the tech world.
Yeah, in the tech world. And not that I saw you as tremendously unhappy, but I think I saw you as somebody who realized that you're working in an 18-year-old world and, maybe 25-year-old world. And at some point, you probably wouldn't get the pleasure of doing that business, when you were 50 years old or 40 years old or whatever. And I think that was part of it.
That was part of it. I think there was more, because we had known each other a couple of years at that point.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But here's the big thing. How does a guy who grew up in Virginia with his own challenges get to that level of understanding of life?
Wow.
Now we get back to Dave Kinney.
Now, that's quite a question. I'm not just a big talker, I'm also a big listener, and I think that's part of it. I love to talk. I think most people do. I'm an amazingly extroverted person as far as that goes, but I do listen to what other people say. And, I've always I'm very empathetic. I think everyone has a struggle. I mean, it's really kind of funny because, you see this guy who's got, $1 billion and cars and, beautiful wife and a gorgeous house. And yeah, he might have, gotten there the easy way, but there's no such thing as an easy job. I mean, there are jobs that are easier than others. And, a lot of the times I think that, I have mad, crazy respect for people who work with their hands. I have mad, crazy respect for people who've learned something about an industry or, they've overcome challenges and stuff like that. And I just love everybody has a story. And absolutely everybody has a story. So sometimes it's hard to get it out of them. Sometimes it's really easy. Sometimes you have to basically interview somebody to find out what's going on. And occasionally you can actually offer advice or say, hey, I've been there, done that.
And where did your story start?
Well, I'm a native of Arlington, Virginia. I grew up there. My mother and father were from upstate New York, and my father came to the Washington area. He was a codebreaker for the Navy. Interesting aside, he wasn't going to be drafted, couldn't go into the Army because he only had one kidney. He had one removed when he was 6 years old. So he was working alongside some very, very, very intelligent people who are doing code breaking. They write books about that now. And I think that, everything that I am was shaped by my mother and my father's sensibilities. And I won the parent lottery as far as that goes.
So when you say you won the parent lottery, give me 3 examples when you say sensibilities.
Well, I mean, I remember my dad taking me one time to the car wash, and I was probably 6 years old. And, it was one of these things where, you walk down the tunnel and there were windows there, and there were guys actually scrubbing on the cars with the big mitts, whatever. And when we got out, the guy who did the final cleaning had a tracheotomy. So he had one of those devices that he held to his throat to say something, and his voice was extremely electronic. And I was repulsed by that. I'd never seen anything like that. I'm 6. And I remember we got in the car. My dad had a 1961 Lincoln before he had a 59 Lincoln. But it was one of those two.
61 was the only one I liked. Well, actually, I liked the 56 as well. 56 Continental was gorgeous.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And my dad bought the 59 on the courthouse steps in Arlington, Virginia in a bankruptcy sale, and went back in 1961 to get it serviced. And the guy said, hey, we can give you like $3,000 trade-in on a new 61. And my dad paid $1,500 for this bankruptcy. That's how my dad became a Lincoln man, not because of anything else. My parents, not car people. My brother, not a car person. My sister.
I'm surprised to hear this because I know the cars you have in your collection and 1 or 2 came from your mother.
I have recently sold that, but yes, I had a '73 Cougar convertible that was my mother's car. Here's a guy with the voice box, and this was 1960, so it was yes, I'm 67 years old. So it was I was freaked out, and I remember we got back in the car. My dad said, "This is Mr. Smith," and he said, "I'm sorry that he didn't say it that way, but I'm sorry that Mr. Smith scared you. But Mr. Smith is a very nice man, and you need to say hello to him next time we go there." So, a few years on, we go, a few weeks on, we go back to the car wash, and there he is. And as a 6-year-old, I'm probably pretty close to wetting my pants at this point because I was scared to death. But I put my hand out, and I said, "Hi, Mr. Smith. It's nice to meet you." And it was a really important lesson, really early on.
What was the lesson you took from that?
The lesson was that, we all have our own struggles. Everyone's different. And I'm very, very fortunate to be ambulatory. I'm very, very fortunate to have, most of my facilities. I'm very, very fortunate to have been born in the United States of America.
That's an unusual lesson for a 6-year-old to take from a guy working at a car wash.
Well, I mean, it was one of those things that was, I'm not going to say it was life defining, but I remember it. Okay. Sometimes, you can't remember an entire year, when you're a kid, but there's certain things that you do remember. And that, that was kind of an early lesson, but my dad was one who, liked to impart lessons. I'm not saying my dad was a perfect man. He was a great guy and he was a lot of fun most of the time. But, like everything else, there was discipline along with the fun stuff. But I took cues and keys from people that I enjoyed their sensibilities as well.
So give me an example of your mother's sensibility.
My mom was, unfortunately, she died when I was young. She died when I was 21. And so I never got to know her as anyone but my mother. So, I got to know my dad as a buddy of mine, and my dad was a huge supporter of everything I did in the last 10 years of my life. He was always there and, kind of cheering me on. But my mom was a very, well, number one, she looked like Jackie Kennedy would be the best way to describe her. She was
almost attractive.
very attractive woman. And she was, for all the outgoing nature of my dad, she was rather introspective. But she would be the one who would tell me about, some of the challenges that I had coming up. Like when I entered into junior high school and all that, hey, you were king of the hill in that grade, but next year you're going to be knocked down a peg and you got to worry about that, or you got to be aware of that. I was always big for my size.
Did she give you teaching moments to try to set you up for that, or just sit down and actually try to talk to you about it?
It was really funny. My father smoked one cigarette a day, and it was a menthol cigarette, and she smoked Newports. And at lunchtime, when I was sick, is when I got most of those lessons. She would, cook me an egg or make a sandwich or something like that, and then sit around and we'd just, kind of, talk. And like I said, I won the parent lottery.
Did she talk to you as an adult, like take you for some intelligence, or was she talking down to you as you are my child?
Well, there was a little bit of that, but later on, by the time I was in high school, she was a person who, would. My parents gave me a lot of rope, and they let me hang myself a couple of times. When I was 15 years old and 9 months, I went across the country with two friends of mine in a van that we bought. Now, can you imagine in 2021 somebody letting their kid go out on a cross-country trip?
I can't imagine a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old in today's day and age even wanting to do that, let alone doing it.
Well, I mean, for us, it was kind of a wanderlust thing. I mean, we had a Woodward and Lothrop's was a department store in Washington, D.C., and I bought a Woody's. We pooled our money, and it was $550. We bought an ex-Woody's delivery van, 6-cylinder Boyertown van, so, one of these kind of, I mean, if you don't know what a Boyertown is, you've probably seen a Grumman. The Grumman's the high-end version in aluminum of the same thing. And we put cots in it and all that sort of stuff and kind of fitted it out for another $100 or something like that and made sure it was running right.
I'm assuming this was over the summer, you weren't in school, and your parents said okay to this.
They absolutely said okay. Now, I had at 15 years and 9 months, I had a learner's permit. I didn't have a driver's permit. And so the extraordinary thing was that I took a good bit of the driving on. We split it in thirds. I really don't know to this day if it was legal for me to be driving that van, but it didn't ever become an issue. We were pulled over once, but I wasn't driving. But we were on an adventure.
And how long was this odyssey?
I would say about 3.5 weeks.
And what did you see?
We went to San Francisco, Los Angeles. We went to Portland, Oregon.
Now I kind of understand your other sensibilities.
We went through Sault Ste. Marie to go into Canada. Actually, I'm sorry, we went through Niagara Falls and then I guess back through Sault Ste. Marie right around there. No, I guess we did around the lake in Canada and then came back down. Of course, you didn't need a passport or anything. It was, a different age. But we'd stop at campgrounds. We'd stop on the side of the road. We had a couple of mechanical problems.
And how did you fund this little jaunt?
It was Mike and Rob and myself. Rob had a paper route. Mike had another job, and I don't remember what it was. And I had made some money painting houses.
So you guys all did this on your own?
Yeah.
You were hitting your parents up smart.
I don't remember. I'm sure my dad, slipped me another $100 or something like that. I mean, that was not a time that, if we would run out of money, it would have been Western Union or nothing. There was no.
So you really you really did win the parent lottery because they not only had sensibilities, but they actually gave you they understood that you have agency at a young age.
Well, I also won the pre-order lottery because I was number 3 of 3.
Yeah.
And so my brother was a superstar. He went to Duke undergraduate and Chicago Law School. My sister was a free spirit, and she went west with a boyfriend and went to Portland, Oregon, and that's why we wound up out there. And it turned out she wasn't in the best of situations, and so we brought her back.
In the delivery?
In the van.
So you rescued your sister?
Well, I wouldn't say that because we came back with her boyfriend at the time, but I think she was ready to come. I know she was ready to come back, but that wasn't the plan. It just worked out that way.
So you've done this odyssey, and your parents gave you some sensibilities. Where did the cars things come from?
Oh, I was a car kid. Yeah, I remember building models. That was kind of one of my outlets. I grew up in a neighborhood where the kind of demographics were weird, so there were no people around my age in my exact neighborhood. So I'd have to leave, go across the creek, which not daunting or anything, but, made for a longer day for a, after school day. So I spent a lot of my time reading car magazines.
So this was just something that came within you, not from your father, not from your older brother, not from an uncle or anything like that.
I did have an uncle who owned a 63 Riviera. I remember that
car.
Well. Yeah. He gave me a ride in the back seat. It was him and his wife. And he put newspapers down because he didn't want my feet touching the ground. Or touching the carpet. I remember that. I don't remember too much else about it. But no, I think, if you were to ask my parents if they were still here, I was a car kid from day one. I remember in 1956 or 50, I'm sorry, it'd be 58. I was 4 years old, and my dad had a good friend, Neil Nichols, who was a taxi cab company owner. Actually, I believe it was Neil Nichols' dad, so his name was Nichols. I don't remember the first name, but taxi cab fleet owner. And my dad was looking for a new car. This would have been when I was 4. I was born in 54 or 5. And my dad brought a used cab home, and he was going to buy it. He was just driving it for a couple of days. And there were wires coming out from where the taxi light on the outside had been, and it was, wired into the dome light of the car. And I remember taking a look at that. I remember like, Dad, this is so wrong. You cannot own this thing. You can't drive it. And I was probably 5.
And was this before the Lincolns?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, we had a Country Squire wagon, 56 Country Squire wagon.
You're really a Ford family, aren't you?
Yeah, we really are. We really are. Then a 60 Galaxy that was my mom's car.
Uh-huh.
And then the Lincolns, and then my dad never stopped having Lincolns for the rest of his life. He had a whole series of Lincolns and then Continentals, and then moving into Marks, and then back into the Lincoln again for a 2000.
That's an unusual choice for someone who's not a car guy. You would think a guy's not a car guy, he would just stick with like a Galaxy or an Impala. Why the Lincoln?
I don't know. I think, they were luxurious and they were big. So
it was a statement.
The whole
back in the day.
Yeah, pretty much so. Yeah, sure.
And you learned a lot about business from your dad. He was an unusual character in that area.
He was an entrepreneur. When I say that he moved to Arlington, Virginia from Auburn, New York, one of the first things he did, he went to law school at night. And one of the first things he did was identified that where Arlington Hall, where he was a codebreaker, there was no parking there. So he rented some land and opened a parking lot called Dominion Parking Service in probably, I don't know, must be 46, 45, 1945, something like that. And I think he charged, if I'm not mistaken, it was like $5 a month or, $3 a month or something like that. And that was probably his first entrepreneurial endeavor. But he invested in, in Broadway shows, and he had a electronics company that he invested in that was a optical scanning company. And the two people who used and needed optical scanners were banks and airlines for airline tickets and for reading checks. And this is, in the 1960s. This is just incredible. Or, very late 1960s, maybe 67, 68, 69. And he got very involved in real estate and did very, very well in real estate.
But from what I remember of our discussions, his main job, how he put food on the table, wasn't these entrepreneurial ventures.
Oh no,
These were always a side deal,
Yeah.
but he was an attorney.
He was an attorney. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So that's where he was a little unusual than some of the other guests I've had on the show.
You know, my father used to say that he took an aptitude test once when he was a kid, and they told him he was going to be a ditch digger. You know, I'm sure there's a little bit of apocryphal about that. He's exaggerating, I'm sure, but I don't think that much was ever expected from him, and I got a little bit of that myself.
Did you understand that at a young age? Did you understand how unusual that was, or was that's just the way?
No,
that
I
is?
mean, it's your dad. And so, you know, there's nothing unusual about it until you get off and you know, go to college or something like that. And then you learn other people's, you know, jobs and the way that, you know, the way that they transported themselves through life or through time.
So fast forward to your 20s. Did you understand it then?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You got it. You understood that whole thing.
Yeah, I started working when I was, well, it was actually that same summer. I started working when I was about almost 16 years old for a guy named Ed Waterman, who's still around. He's only 6-7 years older than me. And he was a big exotic car guy. So, you know, here I am building models and reading about things in magazines. And then all of a sudden, boom, it becomes real life. You know, we had Mercedes Gullwings. We had a 250 short wheelbase Ferrari.
You did? Or?
No, the place that I worked at. And there was, you know, these cars that I'd only read about and never even seen and couldn't pronounce the names of half of them. I mean, I didn't know what a Lusso was. I mean, you know, all that sort of stuff. And then in, you know, early 1970s, it all became like Technicolor and alive to me. And, you know, my father and, you know, to some extent, my mother was very, very supportive of what I was doing.
How so?
Well, you know, I was going to school and I was doing pretty poorly in high school. As a matter of fact, I mentioned to you the other day, the license plate on my Ferrari is 2.3 GPA. I think I actually had a 2.6, but I just love 2.3.
Yeah.
You know, the problem is that when you go to the DMV, you know, there's some that you know are going to be taken, but 2.3 GPA surprisingly was, you know,
This
wide open.
One of Dave's little tricks he likes to do, tell them the number plate on your smart.
Not dumb.
But apparently with your GPA, you kind of were.
I don't think it was ever dumb. I think I just didn't realize that it was smart.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of the, you know, the school system let me down a little bit because I'm dyslexic and there was no testing for dyslexia.
Especially back then.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, even to the point when I was in university, I worked for Disabled Student Resources, and we provided testing services as well as note-taking services. That was my job in university. Even then, it didn't catch up for dyslexic students.
Well, keep in mind, I can't spell, and my writing, you know, people ask me if I'm a doctor every once in a while because I look like that prescription that, you know, the doctor fills out. And so I was extremely fortunate that when my career doing writing started, that was also the era of the PC. And so...
so you literally turned one of your weaknesses, biggest weaknesses, into your strength.
Yeah. I mean, I'm so proud that I wrote for the New York Times for a short period of time. It is
not just the New York Times, buddy. The New York Times, Octane, obviously Hagerty, Automobile. I mean, you have done it all.
And now Magneto as well. And of course, the Hagerty Insider.
So let's get back to the car stuff.
Sure.
What's the first car you buy?
Well, the first real car I bought was 5 cars. It was 5 Plymouth Valiants, all of them with 100,000 miles on them.
What people don't know about this man is he has horrible taste in cars. You think he's got good taste.
Not only that, they had a sticker on the side of them that said District Disposal Service. They were trash cars. These were the exec cars for...
Was this an entrepreneurial play?
Yes. My dad loaned me $2,000, and I bought... all these cars for $2,000, $400 a piece.
Yeah.
And
when is this?
Well, they were 68, so it's probably 72. Yeah, it was 72.
That's nothing even in 72 for a whole car.
No. Keep in mind that it, you know, I mean, you have to go back into time, but a 100,000 mile car was a used up car. It was done in the used car market.
Oh, I understand.
I sold one to my sister.
You sold a
Not a good move.
garbage car, literally a garbage dump car to your sister.
No, it wasn't a garbage dump car. It was owned by a garbage company, District Disposal Service. I live outside of Washington.
Yeah, I'm going to talk to her and ask her about this.
Well, maybe you better not. But, you know, no, I mean, in all fairness, she got the tan one. The rest of them were all white. So, I mean, she did get the best of the best. So,
to match the butterscotch Cougar?
no, this Cougar was not around until 73. So, late 73, I might have.
So what'd you make on this little transaction?
I sold 3 of them, and I traded 2 plus, I'm thinking $1,600 for an R2 4-speed Studebaker Avanti.
I knew this would be good somehow. What you guys don't know, and we'll get to, this man literally, he not only writes the book on classic car values, he has set the high watermark on Avantis at Studebaker Avantis at auction. And you know what? I'm not even going to tell him the other claim to fame was your Avantis. I'll let you tell him that a little bit later. So this was a lesson where you said cars can not just be a passion, you can actually make some money on these things.
Well, yeah, keep in mind I was working for a guy who made my dad's entrepreneurial skills, kind of look, a little smaller in some ways. I mean, my dad was working on a bigger scale. Buying and selling classic cars in the early 1970s was, not unheard of.
How old are you at that point?
60.
And you're literally making money at 16 with cars that were effectively throwaway cars.
No. The only throwaway cars I had were the Valiants. That was
that's how you first made money.
Yeah.
But then you took that money you made and you turned that into real cars where you think an Avanti is a real car.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah. This is an R2 4-speed. This is a supercharged car now.
Yada, yada, yada. Yeah, whatever.
In Avanti Gold with fawn and elk interior. Come on, man. Get excited.
God, you have horrible taste.
I do not have horrible taste. I have pedestrian taste at some point, but I also have great taste.
We'll get to that. You actually do have very good taste in cars, but not with these Avantis. So you did did you buy the Avanti because you're just so excited about the design, or they?
Oh, okay. Let's go back. When I was 10 and a half, 11, I built a scale model kit of a Studebaker Avanti. Now, my father had, his law firm had bought a condominium in Fort Lauderdale, and we went there for probably 10 days, and it rained the entire time.
Kind of like it is right now.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's warmer in Fort Lauderdale than it is right now. But so, here's this car that to me looked like a spaceship. I mean, there's no grill. It's just completely different. This was by far not my first model, but I spent the entire 10 days with this car and looking at it and examining it and whatever. And, I'm not going to say that I said, one day I'm going to have one of these because, that probably just wasn't on the radar. But I spent a lot of time and I kind of bonded with the car. And that's how, if my God, if we'd bought a Gullwing model, could you imagine where it'd be right now? So
yeah, instead you bought the worst model possible.
No, it was a great model. It was an AMT 3-in-1. Are you kidding? You could build it custom. You could build it mild custom. Or you could build it stock. Oh, you're talking about the Studebaker a lot.
I don't like Studebakers, and I never got it with Avantis. Maybe because I'm a different age. I just never thought they were attractive.
I will be happy to admit to anyone that they are a car that turns 50% of the people completely off, and that's okay. I mean, that's why they make vanilla and chocolate, right?
So how much money did you make on that one?
I think I traded that. No, I sold it outright. I sold it to a guy in Maryland, and I think I sold it for $2,600 or $2,800.
Okay, so you're up $800.
No, there was some repairs and stuff like that, but yeah, I made $500.
That's not bad.
No, and then I immediately went out and bought another one.
Oh, I would hate to count how many Avantis you have owned in your lifetime.
It's way north of 100. But I'll tell you something. This is also something about my parents. Now, I'm working for this guy, Ed, and everything was done in cash at that period in time. I mean, there was no nefarious nature to hanging around with a guy who had a lot of cash who was in the car business or anything, because that's what you did. If you needed to buy an Aston Martin, you go to New York City and you put $4,500 on the table and you drive home in an Aston Martin. So I took it a little step further because I would get up some Sunday mornings, take the train from Washington to New York, take a cab into to the train station, get about $3,000 in cash, and the 5 o'clock arrival train into Washington Union Station would have the Sunday New York Times on it. And so I would read the Sunday New York Times. There were no cell phones then. And when I got to either, Bergen, New Jersey, whatever the stop was, something like that, or all the way into New York, depending on whether it had a 201 or a 212 area code, I would make a phone call. And I would see if the car was available. And then I would take public transportation as far as I could, or I would plead with the person to come and pick me up wherever I was. And then I was a serious buyer and I had cash.
And how old were you doing?
16.
Getting on a train, going 200 miles north to New York City.
With $2,000 in my pocket.
And your parents didn't think you were a drug dealer at this point.
I think that, I brought back something that was a little more substantial than white powder. Maybe not to you, a white Avanti, but as a matter of fact, the second Avanti I bought was in New Jersey, and it was a turquoise with turquoise interior, 1964. Then the third one was a white car with a black interior. I'm sorry, with a burgundy interior, another 64. And there was the third one, which was my fourth Avanti, but I went to a large Italian family house in New Jersey, and it was Sunday. So this is when you have the big family meal. And that was probably around 1 o'clock. And I get there and I'm like the star of this show that is so, absolutely not like my family at all. They're loud, they're laughing, they're having a great time. Grandma's in the corner. The little kids are running around. It was like a sitcom thing.
Did they have you sit for a plate of gravy?
Of course. You had to have food with them. And then I get interviewed by, this guy and his dad. And then the discussion comes up. I'm a minor. I can't buy a car in New Jersey. They're crazy. So I said, well, maybe that's true. I don't know. But, they said, I'll tell you what, let me call your dad and see if it's okay. Sure, fine. And so they called my dad, and he says, yeah, he does that every once in a while. And, that was it.
And when did you switch to other cars besides Avantis doing this, like Amtrak corridors?
Only did that with Avantis. Now, working for Ed, a couple of times I would go up. I remember there was an Aston Martin that I drove back. That's why, that.
But you didn't buy that one?
Not for me.
Okay.
But, and I had to pay the guy, and this was on Jerome Avenue.
Oh, that's a rough part of the neighborhood.
Well, this was where the used car dealers were.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was like, I was like prey to the vultures, whatever.
So that's where all the wholesalers were in New York City.
Absolutely.
Up until like the mid 80s. Mm-hmm. And then one of them, Ray Katina, and you probably know that name because he owns a bunch of car dealerships in central New Jersey. He bought a warehouse across from Peterborough Airport. And all the guys that were on Jerome Avenue, they worked out of that warehouse.
Yeah, the Haskells. I remember Eddie Haskell, who was a nice guy. His dad was.
It really wasn't Eddie Haskell?
Yeah, I think that's his name.
Leave It to Beaver. Right?
No, I think that's the name. I'm very close if that's not it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there were some crazy people, and I got to meet all these incredible characters. I mean, these people would call the phone and talk to Ed Waterman. These people, most of them long gone because they were involved in the business back then. And, it would be Ed Jurist on the phone from Vintage Car Store in Nyack, New York. It would be Kirk F. White, people like that. So legendary names.
How long did you do this car trading stuff?
Until I went to college. The college thing was probably kind of a surprise to me and to my parents. I decided I wanted to go to college. I didn't do well in high school at all. I mean, really bad. And, every report card says David doesn't apply himself. And that was true. But then again, I was probably making more money than my teachers, or certainly having a lot more fun. And that's not an excuse. And kids stay in school. But, it felt right. But I really wanted to go to college. I decided
What was the allure?
Well, number one, getting away from home. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I think it was for me, it was a real growing up experience.
Was it just to get away with the parents, meet girls? What was it?
Oh, all of that. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's all the driving stuff to get out of the house. But I wanted to go far away. I wanted to go to a place where no one knew me. And so when I arrived, and one of the first conversations a couple of days in was about cars, and I'm like, Yeah, I've owned one of those. Or I drove an ISO Grifo to school. Because we had it in
See,
stock.
now that is something you should have really focused on. You would have made real money on those cars.
I know, and I love ISO Grifos. Don't get
they're
but,
magnificent.
But now keep in mind that I owned an ISO, but these were $3,500 cars. The problem was, having the $3,500 and not being able to keep it. You just flip it because I didn't have the money to own 2 or 3.
So
or
you were always at the point where the money had to be circulated. It wasn't like, hey, I'm going to drive this thing for a month.
Yeah. No, I should go back. My dad definitely supported my habit. I mean, he helped me out 100 times, in little ways and big ways. But I'll go back a bit. The next cars I had were 2 Lincoln Mark IIs. Not Continentals because they're Mark IIs, 256s, one with air, one without. Turns out that one of the ones I had was owned by Andrew Wyeth. So, celebrity history. My dad and I kind of shared that a little bit. Like I said, he wasn't a car guy, but he could enjoy an older Lincoln. And we didn't have any place to repair it, so we took it to the Lincoln dealer, and they kind of begrudgingly said,
Did you do any work on these cars?
Very little. I tried to buy ones that didn't need work. But I'm not handy with a wrench.
And what was the spread? You were just going up there thinking that they are underpriced in the car, or there was actually an arbitrage between the Metro New York area and Metro DC?
Well, for the Avantis, there was a huge arbitrage between New York and DC because New York had a lot of these cars. And of course, back in '72, rust wasn't a big issue because, they hadn't rusted out yet, I guess is what, they were. Very few Avantis were went out of circulation early because they were always kind of a special car.
Yeah.
So a lot of them remained around.
And what happens in college now? I mean, you do anything car-wise? Or you're just focusing on studying and focusing on girls?
Well, it's funny you ask. My very first car in college, I went out there and I had a plan to not get a car for a while, living on campus and all that. And I read the Kansas City Star one day, and there was a Excalibur Phaeton.
Ugh. You have such horrible taste in cars. They don't even know about the George Barris car that you owned. Like, that was horrific. And now you're telling me you have an Excalibur as well?
No, I had 2 Excaliburs, but yeah. The Excalibur Phaeton, which is not the one to have, the Roadster is the one to have, obviously, but had fun with that in college. It's really, when you're a freshman in college and you've got a Excalibur, it's a big deal. But
you literally were a pimp in college.
Literally. I don't think so. Well, if I tell you what the next car is, then that'll destroy all the pimpiness. But I took that, I drove that back to Hershey, and had somebody else drive it to the shop that I worked at, and we sold that out of there. But that was also an arbitrage.
Okay, now you bring up Hershey. Were you hip to car shows at that point?
That was the first car shows that I went to. So yeah.
And you're in your 20s at this point going to those car shows?
Oh, no. I was 17 when I went into college.
So you really understood this. You really understood the market. This was a focus. You're thinking you're going to get into this.
Well, there was there's a few missteps along the way. My next car in college was I bought a 1963 Cadillac, what they call a combination car. Combination car is both a hearse and an ambulance. That's for small towns. And this was way before the goth movement. And I want you to know that it's really not easy to get a date when you own a hearse. Like I said, way before the goth.
Yeah, this was pre-Stella, big time.
Oh, huge, big time. So that was, I guess, the next car. And there was a whole bunch of cars I had in college as well.
So did you go out of your way to find weirdness, or just it found you?
It found me mostly, but the next car, I guess, that I remember that I had for a long period of time was a Corvette. I had a 68 Corvette that I had.
Finally, you got some taste.
Well, I had a 68 Corvette and I had it in high school, and because it was a 68, it burned to the ground. And just caught on fire. I was on the Beltway in Washington.
God, what a beautiful car, though.
And then I got a 69, and I used that a lot in college. And
so you're buying a 68, 69. That's a relatively new car at that point.
Well, this would have been 72, 73. So yeah, 73.
And did you buy that out of your earnings from all this other stuff?
Wow. I'm sure there was some dad support on that as well.
That still would be an expensive car.
Yeah, it wasn't cheap, but I mean, the whole play, the play was to sell it. I mean, whatever, and not depreciate. But I did sell that car. I came back in summer of my, I'm going to say sophomore year, with that car, and once again, I went across country again. I bought a Dodge Travco van. If you remember, they would be two-tone. They would be like, mine was blue with a white stripe all around it and a turtle top, one of those lift-up tops. Right now, people would pay huge money to have it in the kind of shape.
Oh, you know what? The dry cleaner in Manhattan Beach has got one of those and does a delivery in those things. It's like, not every delivery, but it's...
Okay, but his is probably a fixed turtle top. Mine was like a camper turtle top.
Oh, no.
Volkswagen Westfalia. Yeah, that's what I got.
Yeah.
So I had that, and that the engine launched in Richmond, Indiana. So I was late to school. I called the Dino boys and said, "Hey, I'm in Richmond, Indiana, and they've got to rebuild the top end of the engine." And my father wasn't real happy about that. I'd take it out across country again with another buddy of mine, and we went all the way to Los Angeles with this one because one of my college roommates, we went and saw him in Encino, and anyhow, then, just had an adventure. We stopped at a lot of parks and stuff like that and just drove around. Pardon me. But, and then I bought my first new car.
Which was what?
It's more exciting to people now than it was back then. A Mazda rotary power pickup truck.
Oh, those were awesome.
I know they are. They were the fastest thing in the 1970s. They would pass everything but gas stations. It was real fun to drive. That was one of two that I owned.
It's an unusual choice at a point when
dirt
cheap.
It was dirt cheap
because no one wanted it.
Because no one wanted it. I bought it at a Mazda dealer in North Kansas City, and I'm absolutely positive I paid under $1,900 for it, probably $1,850 or something.
New,
brand new. No equipment. Of course, they didn't have a lot of equipment, but white with black. It was destined to be a plumber's truck or something like that.
So what happens after school? What's the direction after school?
My mother died when I was in college. She died my senior year. So I came back home to help dear old dad because he was 55 at the time. And, and when you're 21 and your dad's 55, you just figure that, he's more than 1 foot in the grave, whatever. And, how's dad possibly going to get along without some help? And so I moved back home and quickly realized that my dad was doing fine. 6 months after my mom had died, he was dating. And so, I'd be out and I'd come home at 2:30 at night and I'd realize that there wasn't a car in the garage. So my dad came home at 4 o'clock and then, it was kind of a role reversal thing. So
he's using the Lincoln to pick up some ladies, huh?
Well, he was a very eligible guy at that time.
Yeah.
I mean, and my dad was also...
Or did he borrow your Excalibur to pick up some ladies?
No, my dad was actually very handsome as well. I'll tell you a funny story. My stepmother and my father were once on a cruise in the Caribbean, and a photographer came up to him and said, "I'm with the cruise line." It was Silver Seas or one of the big ones, and they said, "If I follow you around for the day and take your photos, we'll just give you whatever the class of cabin that you're in, for your next vacation. You can just have it. We'll just give you a voucher." Because my dad was the big silver-haired guy, and my stepmother was also attractive like my mom was, and I just thought that was so funny. That was my dad's big modeling job, whatever. But anyhow, so I mean, it just natural progression. And then I decided to move out, and I bought a condo in Arlington. And I knew that the metro was coming in through there. And so that was a ploy also. I bought a penthouse, an 18-story building, and it was right next to the Virginia Square Metro.
Now, hold on a minute. So I think part of the story that the folks are missing here is you probably learned a little bit about eyeing real estate from your dad.
Oh, God, yeah. Absolutely.
He was unusual in that area.
Yeah, no, he was very, very good. As a matter of fact, I remember Kiplinger's magazine did a thing on him, with Monopoly, things. That was his thing. And he would also do owner financing. So he would, he would get, sometimes he would have the owners pay back. I mean, they would take the paper. And then he also started a company where, he would create mortgages for these properties and pay a decent interest rate. And it was, a very, very popular way to do it. You didn't go through the bank.
So did he take it as a teaching moment, this place in Arlington? Hey, let me help you out in understanding how to do this?
Yeah, I got the down from my dad, $69,000. I think the down was $10,000, something like that. And
$69,000 in Arlington, Virginia today. That wouldn't buy you a closet.
No. And a year and a half later, I sold it for $129 because the Metro, I was suffering through all the, the street being torn up or whatever, maybe even 2 years, I guess, later.
Yeah.
So that was a lesson for me in real estate.
And what
I didn't take
year was this?
78.
So you were dealing with heavy interest rates, crazy inflation, kind of like we're dealing with now?
No, I did get a loan for 5.34% interest. I remember my first mortgage payment was $513.33. Now, I'm not going to say there weren't a couple months that I didn't run down to the bank and use the Visa card to get, a cash advance of $500 so I could make it up. But that worked out really well.
So that was right before interest rates went up, though.
Yeah.
And so what are you doing now work-wise at this point? You're a homeowner. You're starting to be a mature person.
I was no longer working for Ed. I worked for him, part-time when I came home at college. Every year in the summertime, I worked for him. But I decided to start my own car business. I called it Contemporary Classic Automobiles. It was 2100 Wilson Boulevard in Arlington. And this is part of the very fortunate life that I live. I signed a lease on the same day that another agent, this was a court-ordered because of a divorce, they gave the rentals to one real estate agent and the sales to another real estate agent so that they could get things done quickly for the court. And I signed a lease for the garage in this building. And literally the same day, maybe 3 days later, unbeknownst to the other, that the company bought the building, and they wanted to move in the building. And their big attraction for the building was these guys all drove Benzes, in the 70s, and they wanted a place where they could park underground. That was like the ultimate luxury. So I had taken that away from them by opening a car business in the basement of this building. Completely legit, with Arlington, and Virginia's, licenses and all that sort of stuff. Went through the whole process, and put a little office in. And the people who bought the building were very unhappy with me, extremely unhappy. And they made it known that, they wanted the space. And at one point, I had to go to the second floor of the building to use the bathroom. And at one point, I'm in there basically at a urinal, and a guy walks up at the urinal next to me, and he says, "You're the kid who's got the car business in the basement." I said, "Yeah." And he says, "What's it going to take to make you move?" And I said, "Money." And he said, "How much?" And I said, "Try me." And the next week I came down, and because they had the keys to the place, they had left a check on the desk with a thing to sign. And I think the check was for $15,000. And now keep in mind, this is a lot of money.
What year was this?
78.
That is a lot of money.
A lot of money.
2 brand new Chevrolets.
Exactly. Yeah. And, but they really wanted this place, and I had a 10-year lease. So, I went, up to the guy's office, and I said, "Hey, great, thanks. You're partway there."
Nice. Your dad taught you well.
And, I got a check for $25,000 to move out. My brother, who is a real estate attorney, this was the very first time he realized that I lived a very charmed life, because I just made $25,000 for doing nothing, absolutely nothing, except for closing my business, which probably was going to close in a few months anyway, the way I was going.
Yeah.
So long story short, I had the luxury of money and time at this point. And then I was doing nothing, and my dad decided to start a parking lot company. I told him that I thought a parking lot company was a really, really bad idea, but since nobody else was going to run it, and it's family business, I would run it for him, but I wouldn't get paid. And then that became a game of chess, because my dad wanted to pay me, and so I was in the parking lot business for a long time.
And how long were you in the parking lot business?
Till 1991.
Oh, really long?
Yeah, so it's
over a decade.
End of the 70s, all the way through the 80s.
And were you curbing cars at that point, or just totally away from the car business?
Well, no, I've never been away from. I was curbing cars, but not very much. I was just
Just
I had a
have some fun with it.
409 Chevy, 64 409, some other stuff, Mustangs,
Finally got some better taste.
stuff like. Thank you, sir. Stuff like that. And occasional, foreign car. I had a GT6.
Oh, cool.
And I had a GTC, a Mercedes, coupe with the 6-cylinder engine.
SLC.
No, I'm sorry, not Mercedes. Triumph. Triumph.
Mm-hmm.
All of us here at MotoMan are super excited to not only have the podcast back, but for it to be its own show. And there, we look to you for a little assistance. Can you help us grow the show? 2 really easy ways to do that. First and foremost, if you're reaching out via YouTube or other streaming platforms, you click on subscribe, notifications, or more importantly, share these episodes with your friends, especially on Reddit. Now, if you're downloading these episodes, listening via podcast platforms, we'd ask you to rate us. Stars are wonderful, but leaving a written review would be even better, especially sharing who was your favorite guest. So with that, I am incredibly grateful for your assistance in help growing this. And now, back to the episode.
So what gets you to go back? Okay, you probably were doing pretty well. You probably were comfortable, fat and happy. It was great. What gets you to go back into the car world?
Never wanted to work for the family business. Family business is basically real estate. It just wasn't for me. That's the best way to put it. My heart was always in cars. And I was managing a little bit of real estate. This was now the 1980s, and we had some gas stations scattered around. And this was when almost all the small used car places were in old gas stations, because gas stations closed during the fuel crisis, and they became used car dealers a lot of places. And most of the guys that we rented to were Iranians, and fresh from Iran, basically.
Right after 79.
Exactly. And so I got to know some of those guys, which were total characters, like almost all used car guys. They're characters. I mean, you have to be.
Yeah, we had a guy in New York called Mako. He rented from us. Mako.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you one of the people who rented, not from me, but was a guy who is now like the toast of Hollywood, Mohammed Hadid.
I don't know who that is.
Okay, well, his daughter is like some Instagram star and stuff like that. Her name's Hadid, and I don't remember. Somebody out there will know who I'm talking about, but he builds mega mansions.
I'm lucky I can even work Instagram.
Yeah,
that's me. Yeah.
So
you're not really interested in the car, in the family business.
Yeah, right. The other thing was that we had surface level parking lots, except for one, and so there was a time period of about 4 years where all these properties were getting sold. Now, my dad did land assembly, so we bought old crumbly houses and knocked them down, and we made them into parking lots. And the parking lot business is the best business in the world. There's none better. You know where all your receipts are by 9:30 every morning, and it was paid in cash. That wasn't a big attraction. I mean, I'm not going to say that it wasn't, but I was the guy who was counting the cash and going and picking up the money. And I had these, put $5 in space number 5. You park in space 25, you put $5 in, and some of these things were tremendously successful, just unbelievably successful. And at noon, my day was done, but I couldn't justify. I couldn't leave, so I had to hang around till 5 o'clock, and I'd read Road and Track and all that, and I was bored, and I hated it. I hated the boredom. One day, one of the appraisers would call me to ask me what I was renting these old gas stations for. Is it $1,500 a bay? So 3,500, $3,500, $4,000 was kind of the going rate for these things. And one day, a guy called me 4 or 5 times, and I said, "You know what? I'm going to turn the tables on you." He said, "What's that?" I said, "I've always wanted to, I'm a car guy, and I've always wondered about getting involved in the appraisal business. So what do I do?" And he said, "I think I have an idea for you. Let me call you tomorrow." And he called me back, and he said, "I just talked to the people at American Society of Appraisers, and you're in luck because they have a newer program that is automotive specialties." And so I said, "Great." And that's how I started becoming interested in
So
appraisal.
you went through a formal apprentice program.
Well, it's not really apprentice. There's there's a number of tests. There's an ethics test, and as all your buddies say, well, just answer it the other way than you normally think. Whatever, ha ha ha. And then there's uniform standards of appraisal practice, which is another test that you have to take. And then there's 4 levels of valuation, and then you have to have 10 years full-time experience to get my designation, which is a senior ASA.
So what about appraisal attracted you? Why wouldn't you just go back into curbing cars?
Easy.
Why?
I love buying cars. I absolutely live for buying a car. I
Yeah.
hate selling cars.
That I know. And I think Stella would agree with that.
Oh, I hate it. I just can't stand it. I mean, you have to go out on a limb and do all this stuff. And, I've sold exactly 1 car and bring a trailer. And
So the appraisal part of it is you're always at the front end.
exactly.
That was the attraction.
Well, not just at the front end. I mean, I'm involved in it and I'm kind of a player in it, but I don't have to own all those cars. But because I had been around so many of those cars, keep in mind that, there was one weekend, this is going to kill you. There's one weekend that I went to Connecticut to buy a Avanti, and I bought a 64. Yeah, you don't care. I bought an Avanti for $1,900 and my boss went to Richmond and he bought a 300 SL for $2,600.
And Mr. Appraisal Man, tell me how much the car behind us is worth.
$1.5 million, maybe.
And how much is this Avanti worth?
Substantially less.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
Yeah.
So this is how you started U.S. Appraisal.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that started what year?
1990.
Okay, now this is where I need to understand. You're doing appraisals, but how does one get into journalism? How does one get into writing? Not just about cars. Like you didn't go the route of like, hey, let's test drive cars. You were like, I want to talk about old cars.
I'm going to tell you something. Everybody, not everybody, but people ask me how I got involved in it. Huge props to Keith Martin, sports car market.
Yes, sir. That's how you and I met.
Yeah.
I went to the Keith Martin seminar at Barrett Jackson, and I thought you were funny. And I went up to you like, hey, man, I really appreciate it. I didn't think this would be fun. I had a ball that day with you.
Yeah, I have a habit of making almost everything fun.
It was super.
It doesn't work real well in court testimony, but
That's part of appraisal. But it was great. You did the chalk talk
right
over the breakfast, and then you literally took us out to the tents and you went through all the cars with us.
Yeah.
And everything, I mean, everybody was laughing. It wasn't just like, well, you got to look at the tires and the wheels and what's the racing hit. You were just, everything was a joke, but we learned at the same time.
Everything's not a joke. It's just that you have to take it. You can't take this stuff all that seriously.
Yeah.
I mean,
maybe joke's the wrong term. You made it fun along the way.
There's so many cars that I can tell you an incident or something about it, or maybe a story that might or might not be true, but it's kind of grown up around the car. I mean, there's a 911 over there. Everybody who's watching this knows that they were originally 901s, and then Peugeot, decided that wait a minute, we own the 01 franchise, and so you can't call it that.
But that's what's different about you. Everyone can tell us the story about the 901 to the 911. Everyone can tell us about Ford versus Ferrari, but only you, in fairness, can tell us stories about some of the details of Avantis. Only you could tell us stories about Hooper-bodied Bentleys. Like, there's stuff that I have learned from you that I have shared for the past 12 years in the show that came from you. And I think, that's a gift no one else has in this industry.
Well, thank you very much. I'm not going to take credit for that. I mean, full credit for that. I think a lot of people do. But I think my attitude is always, I try to have the attitude that everyone should learn something and everybody should have fun. So, I'm just going to say spouses, because sometimes the spouse is not the wife who is the one who is, being dragged along. But it's much more fun for people when you make it fun for everybody. And, when I do these seminars, we always throw each under the bus or something like that, or have fun with it. And I think that's the way you do. McKeel Hagerty, whose name will come up again. I was doing a seminar once and I said, hey, McKeel, I'm sorry. I think I was a little irreverent. And he looked at me and he said, no one's going to remember whether it's 427 horsepower or 429. But when you tell the story about I'm making this up, but when you tell the story about how a color of a car got its name, even though it might not be true, people remember that and they laugh and they think it's great. And I think you really do learn when, it not only makes, the partner who is into cars, might be something that they didn't know, but it's also interesting to the partner who, didn't know that, or, maybe two designers having a fight, or, this was part of a competition, or, all these things that go on that, you name a car and then you might be able to come up with something that's an interesting factoid.
With that gift, because that's an unusual gift you've got. You are unusual over many people in this industry. How do you go from Mr. Appraisal guy to working for Keith Martin?
Keith had just fired, or someone had quit. The person was a very, very good friend, and I'll just mention it. It was Rick Carey. Keith and Rick had a falling out, and I went to Hershey, and I wrote up some cars, and Rick saw me and saw that I was writing up cars, and he came over and said, "Are you working for Keith?" And I said, "Yes." And, I don't know what to expect at that point. And Rick said, "I'm Rick Carey. It's very nice to meet you. If there's anything I can do to help you, please let me know." And boy, what a lesson that is. I mean, when somebody says that to you, you know that he just had a falling out with his boss.
Sounds like a gentleman.
He is. And, in this business is full of so many just fantastic people, this hobby.
Whatever it is, it's an amazing group.
And I mean, and the fun part is that, you can play at any level. That's the best part. If you have a Harlequin VW Jetta and, and next to it is a Lamborghini Countach, I'm going to go talk to the guy with the VW Jetta.
You would. I have no doubt you would.
I've talked to the Countach guys before, but I've never met anybody else.
So for the avoidance of doubt, the first journalism gig was you taking your skills as an appraiser, walking around auctions and writing those blurbs you see, the facts, and then what you think the opinion is.
Right.
Which I gotta say something, because I just think a humorous aside. That car behind us, that car was purchased by its current owner 21 years ago in New York City at the RM sale.
Mm-hmm.
And it was over-restored according to Keith Martin's magazine. You didn't write it, but somebody else did. And they said that in the blurb, well, the car, it's still over-restored. Hopefully the new owner actually drives it.
Well, his wish came true, didn't it?
Big time. That car's got 90,000 miles, and it's been on 3 Millets. It's been on every Colorado Grand. So this is literally the story of someone finally actually listening to the advice in that column.
I would always try and add humor to everything I did and all those things. And I think I got known for that. I was the first person to write in that, a car had more chips than a Greek restaurant. I'm sorry, more nicks than a Greek restaurant. And more chips than a prep school reunion. That was it. Those are the two.
Your Octane piece is really funny.
Thank you.
Yeah. What is it? Our man over there, something like that?
Something like that.
Yeah. Those Octane pieces are really good.
It's really hard to write for an audience that is a different audience than your own audience. So, I mean, like I did an Edsel the other day for Octane just for fun.
Yeah.
Because everybody knows what an Edsel is. So, I mean, it's one of those things where I have to pick the cars that I think will resonate with somebody.
But hold on a minute. You actually took the time to get to know that market. You went, I didn't know anybody else, but you were the only one going to Brighton every year for many years.
Not Brighton every year, but I try and go to England twice a year.
Yeah.
Pre-pandemic we do twice a year, and I go to the auctions in England, and it's a different world over there. Auctions are different. In the United States, the auctions, the auctions as we know them. I mean, what is Bonham's? It's Bonham's 1793 or something. That's their year of formation. But I just love the differences and in the different ways that things are. For the longest time, auction was the sale of last recourse in England. So if you took you bought it at auction, that was like a bad thing, and that never was the case here in the United States. For the classic car auctions.
Okay, so shifting gears out of auctions, how do you parlay Keith Martin's sports car market to Octane, New York Times, Automobile Magazine? I mean, you've done a lot.
It's funny because when you say that, yeah, I guess I have. I don't think of it that way. I think of it as, kind of a progression in some ways. I got to know the people at Automobile and they hired me. The people at the New York Times, who were the smartest people in the room, as far as I'm concerned, in the automobile section back then. It
Would
was,
you say the same thing today? Because there's no such thing as an automobile section there.
I know. But the Cobb and Marison, the people who ran the last big one, just geniuses in terms of,
This
making
is an
sure
aside. I too used to love reading the Sunday Times, especially the New York Times automotive section.
Yeah.
It was a whole separate section. Oh, I loved it.
supported by the used car dealers and new car dealers.
Literally.
They don't advertise in newspapers anymore. So, I mean, things change. But, it was so much fun. I get an assignment and I did a piece on cars built in New York City. I did a piece on my smart car, and I'll never forget, my office is only a mile from my house, or a little bit more than a mile. And I said that, I needed it to drive to my office. And, New Yorkers are like, what, he drives a mile? Because, that's 10 blocks in New York. Well,
Yeah.
I don't have that thing called a sidewalk. I have this, sheer, mud cliff that I could walk over or, across or under. So, whatever. So yeah, but it's been really, really fun. And I really, really enjoy having my voice out there. I like.
So the answer to the question was you got to know one group of people, then you got to know another group of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's what got you to the Times, Octane, all these other places.
I'm going to tell you something. I learned something very early on. There are 3 things you need to know when you write. Number 1, deliver on time. I don't always do that, but that's number 1. Number 2, your editor is your best friend. Even if he's not, okay? Even if he's not, even if she's not, they're your best friend. And number 3, don't be an asshole. I mean, if you're an a-hole, you're not going to get
apply that to pretty much any business.
I know that, but it's really important because think about it. Somebody's saying, well, who should we get to write this? Well, I don't want to deal with him anymore. I don't want to deal with her anymore. Whatever. I mean, the whole thing is don't be a jerk. I mean, and it's a job, and respect the fact that somebody has gone out on a limb for you to give you this job. And so, it's good advice for anything, but it's easier to every once in a while, maybe those weren't your words, but as long as it's your intent, then that's fine. I mean, I once had Norman Marison just destroy a paragraph that I had. And I remember I had like a 17-word run-on sentence, and he parsed the whole thing. And in 6 words, he said it better than I said in 17.
How long were you doing automotive journalism, or what you would call it, this combination of appraisals and automotive journalism, before you realized the editor was your best friend?
A couple of years.
Took a while.
Not too much. But yeah, I worked with, Keith has a habit of hiring some fantastic people. And one of them became very important in my life later on. That's Brian, who became the editor of the Price Guide.
Okay, so now let's somewhat switch gears here and let's get to the main event. You are known for all the stuff you've done in the past, but really you are now known as the founder and publisher of the Hagerty Price Guide, which wasn't always the Hagerty Price Guide.
No.
So how did that come about?
In 2005, actually it was Iso Grifos again, come to think of it. I picked up, I had a job appraising an Iso, in the mix was an Iso Griffo. And at the time they were selling for, let's just say $170,000, $160,000, something like that. And all the price guides had them as $35,000, all of them, or 40,000 or whatever.
And what were the price guides back then for this industry?
Well, NADA, classic car guide, the black book. Mm-hmm. There was something called the gold book for a while, and cars of particular interest. And then Old Cars magazine had their price guide as well. Of that bunch, I think that CPI, cars of particular interest, which is now part of Black Book, probably did the best job. But all of them were missing stuff, and so. It was one of those.
What were they missing, though?
They were missing the exotics. Like I said, CPI did a better job, but most of them were missing, the movements in the market. And there was a lot of movements in, this is 2006. There was a lot of stuff going on. and or 2005. So I said, after complaining about it, I don't know if my wife said it or I just said it to myself. I said, well, if they're all so bad, why don't I just start a price guide? And
Stella said this.
she was encouraging, and so sure. And so I thought, well, that'll be fun. I'll just start a price guide, having no idea what kind of work was going to be involved. I mean, not only that, you don't just publish it once, you got to publish it again and again and again.
Totally different from your skill set of what you were doing before.
Yeah, exactly. I like to tell everybody I didn't wear glasses until I started the price guide. And it's true. I think I got my first pair of readers.
Did you bring Brian along right from the get-go?
Yeah, this is a funny story. Brian was my editor. He was 23 and he was the editor of Sports Car Market magazine. And I immediately thought, well, if I'm going to start this, I've got to have somebody very, very competent who I work with. So I called Brian and I said, hey, Brian, maybe a couple weekends a month, whatever. Totally wrong. I mean, poor guy. I still feel bad about it because he's such a hard worker and still is. But I said to Brian, let's do this thing. And he said, okay. And so we started it. I was the founder. I was the kind of the idea guy, and Brian was the implementer. And we worked together on this, and we brought it out. And I'll tell you a funny story. We introduced it in 2006 in August, and so we had them for the Monterey, which was, of course, a big event, and I was handing them out, and my wife gave one to Jay Leno.
And you had an HHR, you wrapped.
No, I didn't have the HHR at that point, but that was a year later, I guess. But an HHR panel van, I might add. So not just any HHR. Thank you very much. In black,
you finally got off that Ford crack that you were on for so many years.
Yeah, that's it. Mm-hmm. It was a 12-step program, actually. I had to buy 12 Fords to. No, but the one of the persons I handed a book to was McKeel Hagerty, and I knew McKeel, and I gave it to him, and he looked through it, and he said, "We got to talk sometime."
Now, for the avoidance of doubt, the book was called Cars That Matter.
Cars That Matter, and there was a little bit of tongue in cheek there, because the answer was, "Who determines a car that matters?" I'm like, me.
Yeah.
So we had to have the Moe's Safari car in there, of course, because that's a car that matters to me. No one else in the world. There are very few people in the world, but it was fun. And so we started it, and we published 3 times a year, which we're still doing now. Although I'll give you a little heads up, it's changing. But yeah.
How so?
Well, on the 15th, which is yesterday, we haven't announced it officially. We're going to update 4 times a year, but we're only going to publish twice a year.
In the book format.
In the book format, twice a year.
But the update will happen online where you go to the valuation tools.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I see.
So, the book, books in albatross. What was something in 2006, we had a choice of 20,000 printers in the United States. We're now down to maybe 5 or 6 who'd want the job.
Call me old-fashioned. I like the book. I like the format of the book.
I do too. And looking up 10 cars, you tried doing 10 cars through a drop-down menu and all.
Absolutely.
It takes way too long.
I keep your book right next to my desk, so when I'm researching something, I can pull it out right away.
Yeah.
Now the format really hasn't changed, actually. So the book that you gave me as you stepped off the plane yesterday, it's the same format as 2006.
Yeah, it's grown hugely, though. I mean, the amount of...
Yeah, I can imagine.
And, just to, clear this up right away, there's like 15 people who work on the valuation team at Hagerty. I mean, there's no way we could have done, this thing wouldn't have grown like it did if I hadn't, can't combine separate.
So when you started this, and I remember, you and I were good friends at that point. I remember the HHR, driving with you in that thing. We went to Clyde's in it, actually.
Yeah, that's right.
Went to Clyde's in it.
Yeah.
And was there a thought like, I'm growing this is my baby, I ain't selling it?
No.
Or was there a thought that you're just going to grow it and try to sell it to like Kelley Blue Book or, Cox Media or something like that?
Never thought of selling it, but I knew that at some point, it would either die or it would get big. And it cost a lot of money to get to the point where I took it to. And
for the avoidance of doubt, you funded it on your own.
Oh yeah. And this is where the obligatory "my wife is a saint" comment comes in, because she truly is, and she believes in me. and this was a expensive and time-consuming project, and there were a lot of headaches and there were a lot of heartaches too. I remember one night after doing pricing with Brian, we'd do it around the country. We'd do it so we'd meet in one place, and I couldn't get to sleep, and my heart started pounding, and I took myself to the hospital because I was so worried about all these things. I was thinking I was having a heart attack, and I mean, there's a lot of drama and stuff like that when you have deadlines.
You were worried about just the delivering the product, or because, oh my God, this is costing me so much money. Oh my God, this might cost me my marriage. Was that a real threat?
It was never going to cost me my marriage. I had the money to do it at this point, but it was, I'm not going to say I was pissing away dollars, but, it was going to be a long, 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 long payback. And without having the resources of another company, it was much more difficult than I thought it was.
So did you call McKeel, or did he finally nag you and nailed you down?
My father died just before I started Cars That Matter. And so my father had left a small bequest to a college that was in northern Michigan. And there was a reason for me to be in northern Michigan. And so I called McKeel. And I said, hey, you said, let's talk. I'm going to be in Traverse City. I wasn't. I was going to be in Elma, which is, 150 miles away. But I could be in Traverse City. And so we started a discussion. And, I have to say, here's a man who had all kinds of insight. I mean, this was, 2011, I guess. He knew that he wanted to provide more value to his clients by having, valuations. And so we got together. There was a lot of negotiations. And I remember when I came in and, whatever the discussion was, well, think about what we said and let's all go to dinner. Then we went to dinner, or a bunch of us went to dinner. And then the next morning we had another meeting. This was in Traverse City, and there was a number and that kind of decision. And person said, "Well, we slept on it. What do you think?" And I said, "My wife now thinks I'm smart." And then the discussion was, "That's worth more than money, isn't it?" And I said, "Yeah, it is." And so I've been so very happy working with the people.
And when did they acquire you?
It was about 2011.
It's been a while. It's been 10 years already.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I feel like it was just yesterday.
No. And then we published one version of the book that was called Cars That Matter. And for one printing, it was called Hagerty's Cars That Matter.
I remember this.
And then it became Cars That Matter.
So
I'm sorry, then it became Hagerty Price Guide.
Aside from the obvious, them giving you unusual access to so much data from insuring all those cars, what do they bring, again, also besides putting the money in, but what do they bring to the table?
Oh, man. Well, the skill set and the people, and the direction. They have a database of, they've been working on a database of serial numbers of cars. They've been working on models, all that sort of stuff. All that sort of stuff came into play. And then people who are working, trying to decipher, which cars were actually built during the time. This is more important for pre-war cars than it is for post-war cars. And now we are valuing pre-war cars online, not in the book, but just online. And
that because there's just
no room,
smaller market.
no room. There's no room. We had to kick trucks out of the printed book, and they're all online now because we just ran out. See, here's the amazing thing that most people don't think of. I was born in 1954. When was Ford started? 1906, right?
Okay. You would do whatever you say.
Okay. So when I was 2 years old, Ford had their 50th anniversary, right?
That's crazy.
Yeah. How many collector cars were there in 1971?
I wouldn't think a lot.
Model A's, Model T's.
Yeah.
All the Chevys from pre-war, all that sort of stuff. How many collector cars are there now?
Too many.
2 billion? Who knows? I mean, there's amazing amount of collector cars because every single year, more cars become collector cars. And so, because they age.
But also the newer cars.
Yeah. Which will another subject. Another subject. Yeah, exactly.
Just so you guys know, you will see us in the same clothes over many different episodes because we're going to be talking about a lot of like specific things about the industry. This was just the main discussion we've been trying to put together now for quite a while.
Yeah, exactly. But so there's so many collector cars now, and so we're adding more to the book all the time, and they can't all get in the book, so they have to go online.
Okay, so that's what they brought to the table.
Mm-hmm.
Might be hard to ask you, what do you bring to the table? I don't mean just the book. What did Dave Kinney bring to the table?
Well, I have kind of a unique history in terms of not being a car dealer and being car dealer adjacent. I mean, I was a car dealer for well, I was a car dealer for a short period of time,
Yeah.
but I understand a lot of facets of the business. I also owned a repair shop. I bet you didn't know that.
Didn't know that.
Yeah. I owned a repair shop for a short period of time, so I had that incredible heartache and headache. But and I also owned had a car dealership. But I know these guys, and I know how they operate, and I know they have a pretty good BS filter, talking to people and about values of cars. And, these guys bring the research that we couldn't do. Hagerty has the largest database of collector cars, bar none. And so, we track the prices going in and going out. Not that they're always accurate. But I have a real open communication line with a whole bunch of auction people and a whole bunch of car dealers that I talk to all the time. And I think that, it sounds like it would be a very normal skill set, but I'm car dealer adjacent, I guess is the best way to put it, and collector car dealer adjacent. I play.
And does that translate to like the guy who owns this car, the collector, not a car dealer?
Oh yeah, sure.
How does that translate to them?
Well, I mean, the stuff that I find out from dealers, and also from private sales and stuff like that, a lot of people will, call me up and, hey, I sold my Porsche at so-and-so, and I got $380,000. And it's like, whoa, I mean, that's amazing because the highest sale at auction has been $320,000 or something like that. So, I mean, it gives us a little trend line to see where things are going. Along with where they've been.
So do you always have like a notebook at your table, or because every phone call sounds like it's a research opportunity?
Well, not always, but yeah, I wish I was better organized and I did have a notebook, but yeah, I write stuff down when people call. And, being an appraiser as well, you get to understand what drives values. I mean, people don't understand that this car and this car and that car all have many, many values. They have many, we all know about fair market value. And that's pretty much what a price guide tries to report. But what about liquidation value? Liquidation value, enforced liquidation value. If you had to leave town tomorrow, what could you get for that? Well, whoever's the person with the most money who has any interest in it. You don't have any marketing time, all that sort of stuff. So, I mean, this is kind of the knowledge and background that I tend to, to rely on when I'm doing this sort of stuff. And, we work with hard numbers, and, we now have people who are basically strictly numbers guys who are getting involved in cars. I mean, people who worked with Zillow and stuff like that, and they're doing some valuation modeling, which is something that more...
These guys are now working for Hagerty.
Yeah. But what we're doing, instead of, doing predictive modeling for what the car is going to be worth 6 months from now, we're looking at cars that, maybe aren't moving fast, so we can concentrate on the cars that are moving fast when we go and do.
Were you doing that back when it was just you and Brian?
No, because it was not.
You didn't have the bandwidth,
right? Exactly, not possible to do. And so, I mean, here's the mea culpa. We're not right all the time. We can't be right all the time. And I love to say we're not the guide. We're a guide. We're not the gospel. When somebody comes up and says, I bought my car and it was, 30% more than your high price. I'm like, Mazel tov, fine, and good for you. I mean, thank you for telling me. Now I know that somebody bought that car. Doesn't bother me. Or when they buy it for less than it's in the price guide, and there are always extenuating circumstances. I mean, as we were talking about earlier, offline, colors in Porsches. Oh my God, I mean that can make a huge difference in the value of a car. And colors in almost anything. I mean, I'm an F-150 guy. I've driven an F-150 for forever. Back to the Fords. Yeah, thanks. I've got a GM card, by the way. I've got like $6,000, towards a GM car. So
but you'll never use it.
Oh, I will.
Yeah.
I will.
Why don't you buy me a Z06? How about that? I'm a GM guy.
Yeah, possibly another lifetime.
Or CT5V Blackwing manual.
I will take one of those.
Yes, that's
yeah,
good.
I would take one of those.
So what got you guys into the concept of selling the fixtures into like Bloomberg terminals?
I really don't know how that happened. It just did. I mean, that was above my pay grade as far as that goes when that happened. But
Kind of incredible that,
it is.
that a kid that literally spends too much money on Avantis is now providing data for Bloomberg terminals. That's like beyond.
I'm pinching myself. What can I say?
So what's next for Hagerty Price Guide or Cars That Matter?
Well, no, there is no more Cars That Matter in terms of a price guide. I own a company called, Cars That Matter Media. But that's it. It's kind of static and not doing anything. But the Hagerty Price Guide is going to keep growing and going to be even more out there as time goes on. I mean, if you
What do you mean by out there?
Well, I think that we're going to move into a lot more of the finance companies. And unfortunately, governments rely on us for values. So
I bet they will.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. And right now, they're not licensing that. And I know of a number of state governments that I would love to send a letter to right now and say, hey, guys, if you're using us for this, you probably should think about licensing us. That sort of thing. I mean, they get a copy of the book.
You guys eventually become the Bloomberg of the classic car world.
Well, listen, I mean, there's a lot of people out there that are doing it, and I always tell people, look in 2 price guides, look in 3 price guides.
Well, who's really your closest competitor doing this?
I would say right now, probably still Cars of Particular Interest, CPI.
But when I go to auctions and I see people walking around, I see one book. I don't see any other book.
NADA?
Maybe from like a Mark Hyman sitting on his desk. That's about it.
Well, Mark's got he's got a Hagerty Price Guide on his desk.
Everybody at this airport
Mm-hmm.
and everybody I know at Peterson, they're all classic car folks. They all either go online to Hagerty Tools or they have the Hagerty book. Maybe it's just because I'm in California. I don't know.
Yet they'll all look at me and say, I don't use price guides. Isn't that hilarious?
That is very funny.
I get it all the time. Well, I don't use your price guide. And it's like, my degree in college was radio, TV, film. It was communications arts. And I once did a little project for credit and, for one of the TV things was I informally interviewed people about their TV watching habits. And everybody says, well, I don't watch TV. And then I would bring the conversation around to MASH because that was very popular at the time. And I said, well, did you see the one where Klinger? Oh, no, that was Hawkeye.
Yeah.
And, it was one of those things. It's like, yeah, okay, sure, you don't watch TV because it's not, it's not the thing to do. It's not, you didn't admit it. And I think with price guides, people wrongly think of it as a crutch. It's a tool. It's not a crutch.
I would think it was a crutch at all. If anything, most people want their making skills to be reinforced that they made the right decision.
Mm-hmm.
Like this guy 20 years ago made a hell of a decision.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, everything in this hangar, he made a hell of a decision.
Well, I'll tell you what, it has really been true for most of the time we've been publishing. You're not paying too much. You're just buying too early for a lot of the cars. I mean, and you can't pay enough for a top quality car. I mean, the other thing is, the money side of it should come secondary. It's about having fun. It's about, having an extension of you, making a statement, whatever you want to do.
Okay, I understand that.
I mean, the money part, it's really funny because, and our friends in Britain, they're even worse than we are. It's like, I don't care about the value of my car. Oh, BS. Of course you do. But it's very popular to say that. I'm always reminded, and I probably told you this, there was a Clive Davis story about Bob Dylan. And, Bob Dylan, Mr. Counterculture, hey, Mr. all this sort of stuff. He would call Clive Davis every Thursday to find out how the singles were selling and how the albums were selling. And he was the only artist that he had who did.
That doesn't surprise me.
Because, he's a businessman too, but he didn't want people to know that. And that's fine. I mean, you can be, you know, you can have an air of mystery about you. I don't think any less of Bob Dylan. I actually think more of him.
I would use the difference between the Rolling Stones and the Beatles as kind of that counter offense and how they would approach this, because the Beatles, people think the Beatles, oh my God, best band ever. They were only together for 10 years. I just saw the Rolling Stones at SoFi Stadium here on their 60th anniversary of meeting on a tube platform in England. And these guys have created an international business, not just a band.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where I have huge respect. Now, being that we're talking about huge respect, let's bring this all together.
Mhm.
You've had quite a journey.
Yeah.
What are the 3 aspects, 3 experiences, whatever you want, that were the key to your success?
Wow.
Avanti can't be one of them. No.
It was very hard for me to believe in myself.
Interesting.
I was a kid without a lot of friends. And I had to learn to believe in myself. I thought I was dumb because I didn't do well in school. And, my skill set is different. I mean, I remember the Dina boys in what was then called junior high school, now middle school. He called me into the office because my grades were so bad. And he said, when the Bell system, that was the phone company, when they call and they say, what kind of student was Dave Kinney? I'm going to have to tell him that he wasn't a very good student. And in my head, I said, you dumb son of a gun. I said, I will never work for the phone company. And I knew that back then because I knew I'd have to forge my own path in some ways. So
that's one of the aspects that led to your success. Knowing that you had to believe in yourself and forge your own path.
Yeah.
Okay.
Surrounding myself with brilliant people smarter than me, including my wife, and people who also believe in me. And I would say, the top of that list goes to Stella, my wife. That's it. I mean, it's.
Well, there's one more thing.
Okay.
You're giving me 2. I need 3.
Okay.
Not getting off that easy.
Yeah. Acknowledging the fact that I am one of the luckiest people who ever walked the face of the earth.
You are a very lucky individual.
I made some of that luck. I'll give you that. But I was born in the right place at the right time. I was born not only in the right place at the right time, but I was the right man for the season. When I say that I couldn't have written, I couldn't have done that 4 years earlier when there was no such thing as a PC with a spell check. Because if you saw my writing, even to this day, I mean, it's hieroglyphics. And I have a Amazon Echo sitting on my desk, and for most people it's to play music or to get a news update or find out the temperature or the time or whatever. For me, it's for spelling because I still can't spell, and that's all part of dyslexia. Although I can see a word that is misspelled, most of the time I can pick it out in a paragraph, in a sentence. I'm real good at it, but I can't tell you how to spell it.
Okay.
So I think those are the 3 things. Believing in myself, surrounding myself with people who were smarter than me, and also, to some extent, greater than others believed in me. And then the last.
On that note, I want to thank you for believing in me, because we wouldn't be sitting here. I wouldn't have shot now over 1,300 episodes, traveled the world, met folks like yourself, Bob Lutz, Ralph Scheel, Parnelli Jones. Never would have met any of these people if you didn't sit me down at the Shake Shack in 2006 and say, basically, get off your ass. So for that, thank you, my friend.
You have no idea how incredibly happy that makes me. I think that, we're all just on a journey here. And when we kind of get together in our journeys, we help each other along the way.
Well, you certainly helped me in mine, and I cannot thank you enough for that.
And you have helped me in mine. I appreciate it very much.
Now, on that solemn moment, I am going to give these people a cliffhanger, because we're going to do a couple more episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And in one of those episodes, we're going to tell them how you lost a car.
Until we see you in that episode, bis später.